first step is to download your pattern. Select your file according to your paper format and the size you wish to make. Print your pattern at 100% scale. There is a scale test included on the first page of your pattern to ensure you have printed correctly. Trim around the thin black border and use clear sticky tape to piece the pages together. There is a layout included in the instruction guide to help you lay out all of the pages correctly. We have a comprehensive instruction video on how to print and assemble your pattern. I'll leave the link below. For this style, I've adhered a medium weight fusible interfacing to the bodice pieces. This will give the bodice more structure as well as making it easier to sew. There is more information on this in the instruction guide. Trim around each individual pattern piece and lay the pattern onto the fabric. You can follow the cutting layout included in the instructions to make the most economical use of your fabric. Cut according to the individual instructions marked on each of the pieces. Open out the centre front bodice piece so that the right side is facing towards you. Place the side front bodice piece on top of the centre front bodice piece along the seam, matching up the adjoining notches. The right sides should be touching one another. Pin in place and stitch together using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat this for the other side of the centre front bodice. Press the seams with the iron well. Place the side back bodice on top of the centre back bodice piece, matching the adjoining notches. Pin in place and stitch using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat for the other side so that you have a pair of back pieces. Place the back pieces on top of the front pieces, matching along the side seams. The right sides should be touching one another. Stitch along each of the side seams using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Cut the trim piece into 4 equal pieces. Pin 2 of the pieces to the front piece at the pointed part of the neckline. My trim is quite wide, so I'm folding it in half before pinning it in place. Tack the trim in place at the seam allowance to secure it in place. Repeat this for the 2 back trim pieces, placing the trim at the back seam on each side. Tack in place with the sewing machine. Repeat the steps of stitching the bodice seams in place for the lining pieces. Once that's done, it should look like this. Next, cut a 6 mm piece of rigoline or sew-in boning for the front and back panel seams. The side seams are optional. I find it a little bit more comfortable without, so I've left it out for this video. The boning should be 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch shorter than the top and bottom edge so that it does not interfere with the neckline or waist seam later. Use a sewing machine to secure the boning onto each of the seams, stitching it onto the seam allowance of the lining only. Repeat this for all of the bodice seams. Place the lining piece on top of the main piece with the right sides together, ensuring the trim pieces are kept out of the way. Pin along the neckline edge. You can see I'm taking a lot of time and care here to make sure all the seams are matched up correctly, and I'm using a lot of pins to hold it in place. Stitch all the way along the neckline edge using a 6 mm or 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Clip into the curved edges of the neckline with a small pair of scissors or snips. Take care to not accidentally snip into the stitch line, just the seam allowance. This will help the neckline sit nice and flat in the next steps, so please don't skip this step. Then turn the garment through to the right side. Give the neckline a very good press with the iron so that it sits nice and flat. This is how it will look once it's been pressed. We can set aside the bodice for now and work on the skirt. Place the side skirt piece on top of the centre front skirt piece, with the right sides together. Pin along the side seams and stitch together using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat this for both sides so that there's a side skirt piece on either side of the centre front skirt piece. Place a centre back skirt piece on top of the side skirt piece with the right sides together. Pin in place and stitch together using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat for the other side so that both centre back skirt pieces are stitched in place. Once this is complete, you can overlock all of the seams on the skirt you have just sewn. In this video, I'm adding the additional step of overlocking along the top edge of the skirt. This will help prevent fraying when I gather down my pieces in the next step. Using the longest stitch length on the sewing machine, stitch along the top edge of the skirt pieces. Don't back tack on either ends so that the threads can be pulled down to gather the piece. Pull on the threads to gather down the skirt piece. The skirt must be small enough to fit onto the bottom edge of the bodice. Once it is small enough and the gathers are evenly distributed, tie off the threads to secure the gathers in place. The seams on the front and back will align with the bodice seams. There are no side seams on the skirt. A notch on the skirt will align with the side seams of the bodice only. Pin the skirt piece to the lower edge of the bodice with the right sides touching one another. The main bodice layer, lining bodice layer, and skirt piece will all be pinned together at the seam. You can see I've used a lot of pins here to ensure that the entire seam is well held in place, so it will make it easier to sew. Stitch along the seam using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you reach the centre front point, ensure your needle is down and then pivot at the point to continue sewing the rest of the seam. This will ensure your centre front point is nice and sharp, as this is quite a feature point of the dress. Next, overlock the seam allowance of the waist seam. Then we will press the seam allowance upwards towards the bodice. This will ensure the seam sits nice and flat. Overlock each of the centre back edges. Catch the lining and the main layer together as you overlock. Install the invisible zipper into the centre back. Open out the zipper and pin each side of the zipper tape to the centre back edge. A 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance has been given at the centre back edge to install the zipper. Change the machine foot to the invisible zipper foot and stitch along the zipper tape as close to the zipper teeth as possible. Once both sides are secured in place, close the zipper. Pin the seam below the base of the zipper closed. Then you'll stitch from the stitching at the base of the zipper all the way through to the hem edge of the skirt using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Fold the top edge of the zipper tape behind the seam allowance on each side at the top edge. Secure with a pin and then use a hand sewing needle to secure the top edge of the zipper neatly in place. Repeat for the other side. Place one of the hem frill pieces on top of another with the right sides touching. Pin in place and stitch together using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Next, overlock the seam. Stitch and overlock all of the hem frill pieces together until they are all stitched together as one continuous loop piece. You can use as many hem frill pieces as you like. If you're using a heavyweight fabric, we suggest 4 frill pieces. If you're using heavyweight fabric, we suggest 4 frilled pieces. If you're using medium weight, 6 pieces, and lightweight, 8 pieces. For my dress, I've used 8 pieces for the hem frill. Fold under the hem edge by 4 cm or 1.5 inches, and press well with the iron to hold it in place. Repeat this step again to completely enclose the raw edge of the hem. Press well. Top stitch the hem in place 4 cm or 1.5 inches from the folded edge. As an additional step, I am overlocking the top edge of the frill to prevent my fabric from fraying when we gather it down in the next step. Change the machine stitch to the longest length. Stitch along the top edge of the frill. To make this step easier, work in sections, gathering down 2 or 3 sections at a time depending on how thick your fabric is. Don't back tack on either ends, as we'll be using the tail end of the thread to pull down the frill in the next step. Pull on the threads to gather the hem frill. The hem frill must be small enough to fit onto the hem of the main dress. Once it's gathered down to the correct size, ensure all of the gathers are evenly distributed. Pin the hem frill piece onto the main skirt hem with the right sides touching one another. Stitch the frill to the main dress using a 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once this seam has been sewn in place, you can overlock the seam. Once that's finished, you're all done.